Harrison, Ohio, a modest town where life rarely made headlines among the neon aisles of the local Walmart, 25-year-old Kayla Monroe had been quietly building her future. Kayla had started working part-time in college and stayed on after graduation, earning respect as a shift supervisor. Known for her soft-spoken demeanor and sharp organizational skills, Kayla rarely clashed with anyone. But not everyone admired her success. 29-year-old Marcus Dillon, a stock associate, had worked at the same Walmart for 5 years. Marcus, once a promising high school athlete, had seen life stall into a loop of dead-end shifts and missed opportunities. Struggling with debts and nursing private resentments, he viewed coworkers like Kayla as silent reminders of everything he had not achieved. Kayla barely noticed Marcus at first. Their roles rarely intersected, but when Kayla was promoted to oversee scheduling, a task that included evaluating performance reports, their paths crossed more often. A few formal conversations, a warning about tardiness, nothing more than procedure, or so Kayla thought. Marcus saw it differently. To him, Kayla's corrections felt personal, almost humiliating. Over weeks, a simmering anger built inside him. Friends noticed him becoming quieter, more irritable. A few even joked he was spiraling, but no one expected violence. Until the day of the employee appreciation event. That Saturday afternoon, Walmart hosted a small celebration in the parking lot. Balloons, barbecue, a raffle. Kayla's mother, Janet Monroe, had come to support her daughter. Cameras captured the smiling employees, unaware that within hours, tragedy would strike. Hidden inside Marcus's backpack was a small handgun. No one knew how close the ordinary sunny afternoon was to turning into a scene of horror. The days leading up to the event revealed cracks in Marcus Dillon's facade. Managers noticed him showing up late, taking long breaks, or sometimes standing in the back stockroom, staring into space. When addressed, he nodded silently, promised to do better, and returned to work without incident. Coworkers whispered about him behind shelves, stories about eviction notices, payday loans, arguments in the parking lot with a woman no one recognized. But at Walmart, small dramas often faded into the background noise of restocking shelves and chasing quarterly targets. Kayla, true to her role, remained professional. During a brief meeting 2 days before the event, she spoke to Marcus once again about his attendance. It was not harsh, not even personal, just policy. Her words were simple. If this continues, there could be consequences. Marcus didn't argue. He just nodded, his face unreadable. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his small one-bedroom apartment. His paychecks barely covered his rent. Disconnection notices for electricity and water sat unopened on the counter. In the sink, dirty dishes piled up. A half-eaten fast food burger lay forgotten on the coffee table. The apartment smelled faintly of damp and old tobacco. His anger boiled over. He told himself that people like Kayla thought they were better, hiding behind smiles, judging silently. He opened a drawer under the television stand and pulled out a worn shoebox. Inside was a compact handgun he had bought months earlier from an old acquaintance. Cash under the table, no paperwork. It had been meant for protection, or so he had told himself at the time. Now, it sat heavy in his hand, more real than the future he couldn't seem to grab. Meanwhile, Kayla and her mother Janet were excited for Saturday's event. Janet had always been proud of her daughter, the first in the family to earn a degree, the one who never gave up. They talked about the raffle prizes and joked about winning a flat-screen TV. That Friday night, as the Walmart team set up tables and tents in the parking lot, Marcus watched from a distance. He said nothing. He clocked out early, claiming he wasn't feeling well. No one pressed him about it. He spent the night alone, the gun on the coffee table, the decision already beginning to form inside him like a shadow that would not leave. The morning of the event dawned bright and warm, with a crisp breeze stirring the banners strung across the Walmart parking lot. Employees bustled around, setting up food tables and folding chairs while upbeat pop music blared from rented speakers. Children ran between booths offering free candy and face painting. It was the kind of scene small towns lived for, a communal moment, simple and ordinary. Kayla arrived early, smiling, wearing a blue Walmart polo tucked neatly into black jeans. Janet walked beside her, proudly carrying a homemade chocolate cake for the dessert table. Kayla had insisted on inviting her mother, saying, "It's nothing fancy, but you'll get to meet everyone." Inside the store, Marcus lingered near the break room, pretending to check his schedule. His backpack sat slung over one shoulder, heavier than usual, weighted down by the concealed handgun. His name wasn't on the event volunteer list. No one expected him outside. He blended in among employees coming and going for their shifts. Around noon, the celebration kicked into full swing. Store manager Glenn Richter, a broad, jovial man in his 50s, gave a short speech thanking the staff. A raffle was announced. Kayla laughed and clapped along, teasing Janet about winning a prize. Across the lot, Marcus watched from behind a row of shopping carts. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the strap of his backpack. His vision tunneled. Laughter, music, the sizzling barbecue, it all faded into static. Marcus's plan wasn't fully formed. Part of him didn't even know if he would go through with it. But standing there, seeing Kayla smile, seeing her surrounded by friends and family, something inside him twisted hard. To him, it looked like triumph, like a life he would never have. Still, he waited. No one noticed him drift along the outer edge of the lot, pretending to check his phone. No one questioned why he kept adjusting his bag. Small-town trust, combined with the chaos of the event, shielded him. Janet, oblivious, snapped a photo of Kayla at the prize table, laughing over a giant stuffed animal. It would be one of the last photos she would ever take of her daughter. Inside Marcus's mind, the resentment had crystallized into something sharp, unforgiving. Logic had long since abandoned him. He wasn't thinking about consequences anymore, only about evening the scales, about making someone feel as small and powerless as he did every single day. And he knew the moment was coming soon. The afternoon sun hung high, casting sharp shadows across the Walmart parking lot. The smell of grilled burgers mixed with the sweet scent of cotton candy from a rented machine. Conversations buzzed. Children screamed with laughter near the inflatable bounce house. In that noise, in that bright ordinariness, Marcus Dillon disappeared. He paced slowly along the perimeter of the lot, phone to his ear as if deep in conversation. No one gave him a second glance. His heart hammered, but his face remained blank, calm, rehearsed. Across the lot, Kayla and Janet stood in line for the raffle prize announcements. Kayla chatted with another supervisor, laughing about Janet's lucky streak after she won a small gift card in an earlier round. Kayla's arms were full, prizes, a soda, a teddy bear, but she wore the easy, genuine smile of someone who felt secure in her life. Marcus fixated on that smile. In his mind, it wasn't just Kayla standing there. It was everyone who had ever overlooked him, corrected him, dismissed him. The bosses who wrote him up, the teachers who said he wasn't applying himself, the friends who stopped calling. They all blurred together now, faces melting into one. The final raffle began. Glenn Richter pulled names from a clear plastic bin. Laughter and applause rose again. Kayla cheered when Janet's name was drawn for a small Bluetooth speaker. Janet hugged her daughter and jokingly bowed to the crowd. Someone snapped a photo. Marcus's hand slipped into his backpack, fingers wrapping around cold steel. He was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment closing in on him. He crossed the distance quickly, weaving between tables and folding chairs. His vision narrowed, the sound of the crowd dimming to a low, distant hum. He could see Kayla clearly now, her back half turned toward him as she hugged her mother. No one noticed Marcus until he was already raising his arm. In the instant the gun appeared, a nearby employee gasped. Someone shouted, but too late. The first shot rang out, cutting clean through the noise. Kayla staggered, confusion flashing across her face before pain overtook it. Janet screamed, a high, raw sound that tore through the parking lot. Marcus fired again. And again. 3 shots. Then 4. Kayla collapsed into her mother's arms. Blood spread quickly across her blue shirt, staining Janet's hands as she tried to hold her up, tried to stop the inevitable. People screamed, scrambled for cover. Plastic chairs clattered to the ground. The Bluetooth speaker dropped from Janet's trembling hands and shattered. Marcus stood over them for a heartbeat longer, gun still raised, his face blank. Then he turned and ran. Pandemonium erupted. Someone called 911, others sobbed or froze, too shocked to move. Glenn Richter, stunned, tried to direct people back toward the store. Janet cradled her daughter's head, whispering Kayla's name over and over again, as blood soaked the asphalt beneath them. The ordinary afternoon was shattered, and nothing in Harrison would ever feel safe again. Janet Monroe knelt over her daughter, her hands trembling violently as she pressed them against Kayla's wounds, trying to stop the blood that seemed to pour from nowhere and everywhere at once. Kayla's eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion clouding them before closing again. "Stay with me, baby. Stay with me," Janet pleaded, her voice raw with terror. Around them, the parking lot was chaos. People screamed, others sobbed uncontrollably. Someone vomited behind a nearby table. Store manager Glenn Richter was on the phone with 911, trying to shout over the noise. "She's not breathing!" a woman cried out, dropping to her knees beside Janet. It was Heather Lowry, a coworker who had once trained with Kayla. Heather, her hands still sticky with frosting from a cupcake she had been eating, fumbled to perform CPR. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Marcus Dillon, meanwhile, was already gone, sprinting through the back lot, disappearing between dumpsters and loading bays. A few employees had caught a glimpse of him fleeing, but were too shocked or frightened to pursue. Walmart security cameras caught the grainy footage. A figure in a blue hoodie, backpack bouncing as he ran, gun still visible in his right hand. First responders arrived within minutes. Paramedics raced toward Kayla, pushing Janet aside as gently as they could while starting chest compressions. They worked furiously, trying to stem the bleeding, intubating her, injecting medications. But it was clear to the trained eyes of the paramedics, the shots had done catastrophic damage. They loaded Kayla onto a stretcher, Janet stumbling after them, her hands and arms stained red. Sheriff's deputies began cordoning off the scene with yellow tape. Witnesses were herded into groups for questioning. Parents clutched their children, employees hugged one another, and some simply stood, stunned, as if their bodies had forgotten how to move. Inside the ambulance, Janet sat pressed against the wall, numb and shivering. She barely registered the medic's words. "We're doing everything we can. Just hold on." The vehicle jolted forward, sirens splitting the heavy afternoon air. At the hospital, trauma surgeons were already preparing for Kayla's arrival. A code red had been called, but time and blood were slipping away too fast. Back at the Walmart parking lot, deputies reviewed security footage, snapped photos of bloodstains, and began piecing together early witness statements. All of them pointed to Marcus Dillon, someone many barely knew, someone no one had thought capable of this. As one deputy quietly put it, "This wasn't random. He came here for her." The manhunt for Marcus had begun. The trauma team at Harrison General Hospital sprang into action the moment Kayla Monroe's stretcher burst through the ER doors. Nurses shouted vitals across the room. Blood pressure dangerously low, weak pulse, shallow, ragged breathing. Dr. Stephen Mallory, the lead trauma surgeon, examined her quickly. Chest wound, abdominal entry, possible spinal involvement. She's critical. There was no time for comfort or ceremony. Kayla was rushed into surgery, leaving Janet in a plastic chair in the emergency waiting room, hands stained with her daughter's blood, her mind refusing to accept what was happening. In another part of town, Harrison County Sheriff's Department launched a coordinated search. Roadblocks sprang up within 15 miles of the Walmart. Deputies combed wooded areas, abandoned lots, nearby trailer parks. Marcus Dillon's name and photograph circulated through patrol units, along with a description of his clothing and the weapon. Detective Laura Bishop, assigned as lead investigator, stood in the Walmart security office, reviewing the grainy footage again and again. "He came for her," she muttered, echoing what had already been said. The tape showed no hesitation, no random shooting into a crowd, just a direct, targeted attack. Personal, calculated. Witness interviews began piecing together Marcus's last known movements. Several employees remembered seeing him earlier, lingering by the carts or near the break room. "I thought he was just on his break," one said, voice shaking. "I saw him pacing, but I didn't think anything of it," said another. Back at the hospital, Janet stared blankly at the beige walls of the waiting area. A chaplain approached quietly, offering water, tissues, hollow words of comfort. Janet barely heard him. She replayed the shooting in her mind over and over. Kayla's smile a second before the shots, the confusion, the collapse. 3 hours passed. Finally, Dr. Mallory emerged, his scrubs streaked with blood. His face told Janet everything before he even spoke. "We did everything we could," he said quietly. "The injuries were too severe." Janet let out a sound, part gasp, part cry, and folded forward in the chair, as if her body could no longer support the weight of the news. Kayla Monroe was gone. Back at the Walmart, news had already begun leaking. A reporter from the local station hovered near the taped-off area, camera crew in tow. The headline that would soon sweep the town and beyond had already written itself. Walmart shooting claims young woman's life. Suspect at large. Detective Bishop knew time was slipping away. Every hour Marcus remained free, the harder it would be to find him, and the more dangerous he could become. Inside her squad car, Bishop radioed dispatch. "Expand the perimeter. Assume he's armed and desperate. He's not done running yet." Marcus Dillon ran until his legs burned and his breath tore at his chest. By the time the first patrol cars began circling the nearby neighborhoods, he had already slipped into a wooded area behind a line of aging industrial warehouses. The forest was thin, but wild. Tangles of underbrush, broken tree limbs, discarded trash. Marcus moved erratically, stopping and starting, stumbling through shallow streams and tripping over roots. His hoodie and jeans were soaked with sweat and dirt. His mind raced in broken fragments. He had done it. He had pulled the trigger. He had seen Kayla fall. And now, the weight of it pressed down on him, but not as regret, only as panic. At an abandoned hunting cabin he'd stumbled across months earlier, Marcus shoved open the rotting door and collapsed inside. The place smelled of mildew and animal droppings, but it was shelter, and for now, it was invisible. He sat in the dark, the gun still heavy in his lap, rocking slightly, mind bouncing between racing thoughts. Where will I go? They'll never understand. It's their fault. It's her fault. Meanwhile, Harrison buzzed with tension. Detective Bishop stood in front of a map tacked onto a conference room wall. Red markers showed the last known sightings, roadblocks, and search areas. Every available deputy had been pulled into the operation. State police were alerted. Helicopters were on standby. "We assume he's hiding somewhere nearby," Bishop said at the first press briefing. Her voice was calm but clipped. "Residents should stay indoors, lock their doors, and report anything suspicious. He is considered armed and dangerous." The sheriff's department phone lines lit up almost immediately after the broadcast. Reports came pouring in. A man matching Marcus's description was seen behind a gas station. Someone thought they spotted him in the woods behind the elementary school. A pickup truck was reported stolen from a nearby property. Most leads led nowhere, panic magnifying every shadow. Still, the urgency escalated. The media swarmed the Walmart parking lot, broadcasting live updates. A photo of Marcus, taken from his Walmart ID badge, appeared on every screen, framed by captions like, "Manhunt underway after Walmart shooting." At the hospital, Janet Monroe sat in a small, sterile conference room where detectives had moved her after Kayla's death. She barely registered their questions. How well did Kayla know Marcus? Had there ever been any threats? Any warning signs? Janet could only shake her head. Kayla had never mentioned Marcus outside of work. He had been, at most, a background figure. "Why would he do this?" she whispered. Detective Bishop didn't answer immediately, because even with all her experience, she wasn't sure yet. Anger, jealousy, a breaking point no one saw coming. What she knew was this: Marcus Dillon would not stop running until he was forced to. And they had to find him before something, or someone else, broke. Marcus sat in the dark cabin as night fell, the cold seeping into his bones. His body ached from running, but his mind was more frayed than ever. He had no food, no clear plan, and the small town he once blended into now had his face plastered across every news broadcast. He knew he couldn't stay hidden for long. At around 2 a.m., under the cover of darkness, Marcus crept out of the woods. Moving through the back streets, he avoided main roads and patrol cars. His mind replayed half-formed ideas: steal a car, find cash, leave the state, maybe head south, anywhere but here. He needed supplies first. At a closed 24-hour convenience store on the edge of town, Marcus smashed a side window with the butt of his pistol. The alarm shrieked into the empty night. Marcus, panicked but desperate, grabbed bottles of water, a few snack bars, a change of clothes, and, most crucially, a prepaid cell phone from behind the counter. His hands shook so badly, he dropped the phone twice before stuffing it into his pocket. Sirens howled in the distance. He bolted again, vanishing into the nearby fields before officers arrived. By morning, the stolen supplies were all over police radios. Smash and grab at Clark's Mini Mart. Suspect matches Dylan's description. Detective Bishop reviewed the incident report grimly. Marcus was desperate, moving without a clear plan, and that made him unpredictable. Dangerous. She ordered new checkpoints along the southern roads out of Harrison and deployed K-9 teams along the woods near the store. He's on the move, Bishop told her team, and he's running out of options. Meanwhile, Janet Monroe sat at home, staring at the half-packed bag still lying by the door. She and Kayla had been planning a short vacation after the appreciation event, a weekend at a cabin near Lake Erie. Now the sight of the bags gutted her. Neighbors dropped off casseroles and flowers, offering hugs Janet barely felt. She didn't know how to answer them when they asked, "Why would he do this? Did Kayla ever say anything?" No. Kayla had never mentioned Marcus outside of a passing annoyance about a missed shift. That was it. The not knowing gnawed at Janet worse than anything. If it had been random, or if there had been a reason, she might have found a place to put her grief. But this felt like being torn open without any way to stitch herself back together. By mid-afternoon, a small vigil formed outside the Walmart parking lot. Employees and townspeople brought candles, photographs, handwritten notes. Balloons drifted gently in the breeze, tied to a makeshift memorial. And somewhere out there, Marcus Dillon was still breathing the same air, still free. Detective Bishop looked out at the growing crowd and tightened her jaw. The town wouldn't rest. The department wouldn't rest, not until Marcus Dillon was found. And she knew that the window to catch him without more bloodshed was closing fast. By nightfall, Detective Bishop had shifted the search strategy. Patrols were now focusing less on canvassing distant areas and more on tightening a cordon around likely hideouts, woods, abandoned structures, and isolated back roads within a 20-mile radius. Roadblocks were manned by deputies in bulletproof vests, checking every vehicle, flashlight beams piercing the dark. K-9 units combed the fields. Aerial drones buzzed overhead, using thermal imaging to detect any trace of movement in the woods. Marcus, unaware of just how much the net had tightened, moved recklessly. The stolen cell phone he'd taken from the convenience store burned a hole in his pocket. He knew better than to use it. Still, the need for contact, for some human voice, gnawed at him. At 10:42 p.m., sitting against the crumbling wall of an abandoned feed store, Marcus powered the phone on. No texts, no calls. He tapped out a message to the only number he could remember, his sister, Dana Dillon, but hesitated before hitting send. What could he even say? Instead, in a haze of fear and guilt, he called 911. The dispatcher answered in a calm, practiced tone. 911, what's your emergency? Marcus said nothing at first. He could hear his own breath, shaky and shallow. Finally, he whispered, I didn't mean for it to happen. Then he hung up. The call pinged a cell tower 3 miles north of downtown Harrison. Within minutes, Detective Bishop had teams moving toward the signal's origin. Road units, plainclothes officers, tactical squads. They weren't taking chances. Marcus, realizing what he had done, stumbled back into the woods. His hands shook violently. The borrowed clothes clung to his skin, damp with sweat and rain. In his mind, reality blurred. He thought he saw Kayla's face in the trees, heard whispers that weren't there. He hadn't planned beyond the shooting. He hadn't thought about what came next. He hadn't imagined this. The cold, the hunger, the sheer animal terror. Near midnight, Deputy Chris Palmer spotted movement near the edge of a field off County Route 12. A figure ducked into the trees. Palmer radioed in. Possible sighting, east side, moving on foot. Within moments, floodlights illuminated the field. Officers fanned out with rifles raised, issuing commands. "Marcus Dillon, come out with your hands up!" There was no answer. Only the sound of wind whipping through the grass. Detective Bishop arrived moments later, heart hammering. She knew cornered suspects were the most volatile. She ordered her team to close in slowly, methodically, no sudden moves. Somewhere just beyond the tree line, Marcus crouched low, clutching the pistol to his chest, mind spinning out of control. He thought about running again. He thought about using the gun on himself. Mostly, he thought about how this had been inevitable from the start. The standoff had begun, and it would not end cleanly. The woods were unnaturally still, save for the distant buzz of generators powering floodlights and the clipped orders of officers taking up positions. Detective Bishop crouched behind a patrol SUV, binoculars scanning the tree line. The thermal drones had picked up sporadic flashes of movement, enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. Marcus Dillon was still out there, armed and desperate. Negotiators set up a loudspeaker, trying to coax him out without bloodshed. "Marcus, this is Sheriff's Department. We don't want anyone else to get hurt. Put the weapon down and come out." Silence. Every minute that passed hardened the air around the officers, tension crawling like static over their skin. Deputy Chris Palmer tightened his grip on his rifle. Another deputy, younger, wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool night air. Marcus, huddled behind a fallen log deeper in the trees, heard every word over the loudspeaker. His mind raced in chaotic loops. "You're done. They'll tear you apart. It's over. Just finish it." He looked down at the gun in his lap, turning it slowly in his hands. His fingers grazed the trigger once, then twice, but he couldn't bring himself to pull it. Not yet. He thought about Kayla, her face as he fired. Not anger, not fear, just shock. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby, an officer creeping closer, unknowingly stepping over the invisible tripwire inside Marcus's mind. Without thinking, Marcus raised the gun and fired once into the dark. Officers shouted, "Gunfire! He's firing!" The perimeter collapsed inward instantly. Armed units surged into the trees, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon! Get on the ground!" Marcus fired again blindly, a wild, hopeless shot that hit nothing but air. In the next breath, 2 deputies opened fire, striking him in the shoulder and chest. He dropped like a marionette with its strings cut, the gun slipping from his hand into the wet grass. Officers swarmed him. Medics rushed in immediately after, but it was clear, even before they checked for a pulse, that Marcus Dillon was gone. Detective Bishop stood over the scene, watching silently as they covered his body with a tarp. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only the hollow, familiar weight of another life, 2 lives, shattered beyond repair. The town of Harrison exhaled, some with relief, others with lingering fear. At the vigil outside Walmart, where candles still burned low against the breeze, someone posted a handwritten note beside Kayla's photo. "You deserved better. We will not forget." Janet Monroe sat in her living room that night, watching the local news announce Marcus's death. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just sat there, clutching Kayla's favorite childhood photo against her chest, a little girl in a Halloween costume, smiling with a missing front tooth. In the days that followed, the media would dissect every angle, how no one had seen Marcus's unraveling, how security had missed signs, how senseless it all had been. Detective Bishop filed her final report, boxed up the evidence, and moved on to the next case. But she knew Harrison would wear this scar for years, and for Janet, and for Kayla, there was no moving on, only surviving the aftermath. The case was closed. The damage remained. The news of Marcus Dillon's death spread fast, but not neatly. By morning, speculation churned across social media. Arguments about whether he had wanted to die versus whether officers had moved too fast. Every headline seemed more frenzied than the last. Shooter dead after Walmart killing. Small town shaken by tragedy. Detective Laura Bishop sat in her office, staring at the preliminary use of force reports. Each line was necessary, procedural, but none of it captured the hollow knot in her chest. She'd seen it before, tragedies that didn't end with the final gunshot. Tragedies that lingered in living rooms and empty bedrooms, in questions that no one could ever answer fully. She looked down at the evidence log. Marcus's pistol, his torn backpack, the prepaid cell phone he never used again after the 911 call, a crumpled receipt from the store he had broken into, still in his jacket pocket. All of it would go into evidence lockers, gathering dust. None of it would make sense of what had happened. Meanwhile, Janet Monroe found herself trapped in a numbing routine. Wake up, sit in silence, ignore the food piling up in the fridge from well-meaning neighbors, watch the news until her eyes burned. The town around her returned to something resembling normal. Kids went back to school. The Walmart reopened its doors. New headlines took over the front pages. But for Janet, every sound, every morning, carried an echo of what had been ripped away. She visited the vigil site late one evening after the crowds had thinned. Someone had added new candles, fresh flowers. Among them was a framed photo of Kayla as a teenager, wearing her graduation cap, smiling with the effortless pride of someone who believed the world was open to her. Janet knelt there, tracing the frame with her fingers. A local reporter approached cautiously, microphone in hand, camera crew lagging behind. "Mrs. Monroe, would you be willing to say a few words about Kayla?" Janet looked up, eyes red, voice hollow. "She deserved more than this," she said simply. "She deserved to grow old." And then she stood, leaving the reporter speechless, walking away from the flickering candles into the dark. The district attorney announced a full review of Walmart's internal policies, spurred by community pressure. There were calls for better employee mental health support, tighter background checks, improved security protocols. At the city council meeting the next week, people lined up to speak. Some blamed Walmart, some blamed law enforcement, some blamed society. Most just cried. Detective Bishop attended in plain clothes, sitting in the back, anonymous. She didn't speak. She knew better than most that sometimes there were no villains you could fix, just broken people, breaking others. In the coming days, Harrison would learn to tell the story of Kayla Monroe, not just the story of her death, but the story of her life. But for now, the town stood suspended, caught between outrage, sorrow, and a hollow silence that words could not fill. The investigation into Marcus Dillon's life unfolded slowly in the days after his death. Detective Bishop sat in the evidence room, sifting through binders filled with school records, employment files, medical histories, and police reports. There was no single dramatic red flag. Instead, there was a long, grim paper trail of missed opportunities. As a teenager, Marcus had been suspended twice for fighting, once for threatening another student. School counselors had flagged him for anger issues, but he never completed recommended therapy. As an adult, he had cycled through low-wage jobs, accumulating minor infractions, insubordination, absenteeism, but nothing serious enough to escalate to intervention. His medical records revealed a history of untreated depression, compounded by substance use, mostly alcohol, occasionally painkillers. But again, no one event had sounded alarms loud enough for real action. Marcus Dillon had simply slipped through the cracks, becoming a slow-burning risk no one saw fully until it was far too late. The autopsy confirmed what law enforcement already suspected. Marcus had no drugs in his system at the time of the shooting. His actions had been deliberate, unclouded by intoxication. Detective Bishop closed the file with a heavy hand. It was the kind of outcome that left no satisfaction, only a brittle, exhausted sadness. Meanwhile, public frustration deepened. Town hall meetings grew tense. Parents demanded to know why someone like Marcus could have been employed for years without closer supervision. Others called for mandatory mental health evaluations for all Walmart employees, a proposal that civil rights groups immediately pushed back against. Walmart corporate representatives issued carefully worded statements about re-examining internal practices and prioritizing employee well-being, but few believed the words would translate into real change. At Kayla's funeral service, the church overflowed. People stood in the aisles and out into the parking lot. Friends from college spoke about her kindness, her work ethic, her big plans. Coworkers shared stories of how she stayed late to help new hires, how she remembered birthdays and brought cupcakes without being asked. Janet Monroe barely heard most of it. When she stood to speak, she didn't talk about Kayla's death. She talked about her life. She deserved more time, Janet said, voice steady but ragged. She deserved to see the good she was building come back to her. She deserved a future that was stolen, not by a single moment, but by 1,000 failures that piled up until someone like him could walk through the cracks straight into her life. There was no applause, only silence, heavy, unbearable silence. Detective Bishop, standing at the back, lowered her head. She knew the case was closed. She knew the evidence was filed, but the real consequences were just beginning. The first lawsuits were filed 3 weeks after Kayla's funeral. Janet Monroe, through a quietly grieving but determined attorney, sued Walmart for wrongful death, citing negligence in failing to recognize and act on Marcus Dillon's instability. The claim was simple but heavy. If basic employee screening, mental health support, or management intervention had been stronger, Kayla might still be alive. Other lawsuits followed. Former employees alleged unsafe working conditions. Families of traumatized witnesses sought damages for emotional distress. Even city officials debated suing the corporation for the costs incurred by the manhunt and emergency response. Walmart responded predictably. A wall of lawyers, press releases about our deepest sympathies, and silent settlements behind closed doors. Detective Laura Bishop wasn't surprised. She knew the legal battle would stretch for years, but even she felt a hollow ache watching it unfold. The truth was simple and brutal. Lawsuits would move money, not heal wounds. In Harrison, life stumbled toward something resembling routine. The Walmart reopened after a 2-week closure, but business was slow. Some employees, those who could, quietly transferred to other locations. The employee appreciation event was never spoken of again. Janet found herself avoiding entire sections of town now. She couldn't bear to drive past the parking lot where Kayla had fallen. Couldn't step into the grocery store without seeing faces tighten in awkward sympathy. She spent more and more time at home, sorting through Kayla's belongings, notebooks filled with half-finished goals, clothes folded neatly in drawers, photos that captured 1,000 ordinary, irreplaceable moments. Some nights, she sat in Kayla's room, reading aloud from her daughter's favorite childhood books, pretending, if only for a moment, that Kayla might hear her. Meanwhile, media attention faded. Other tragedies took over the news cycle. Harrison slipped back into obscurity, just another town with an invisible scar. But for those who stayed, the wound remained open. Detective Bishop attended a private memorial event at the Walmart break room, a quiet gathering for employees who hadn't left. No reporters, no press releases, just a handful of people lighting candles, sharing small memories of Kayla. Bishop listened without speaking, taking in the halting, sometimes guilty words. I should have noticed something was off with Marcus. I thought he was just quiet. I wish I had said something. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about the heavy, irreversible knowledge that small actions, or inactions, can sometimes add up to disaster. When Bishop left that night, she drove past the woods where Marcus had once hidden, past the empty feed store where he had stolen supplies. She thought about the fragile scaffolding that held small towns together. Trust, familiarity, the illusion of safety, and how quickly it could collapse under the weight of one broken life. In a locked drawer in her office, she kept Kayla's file. Closed, yes. Forgotten, never. By late autumn, the leaves turned brittle and the air sharpened. But for Janet Monroe, time didn't move at all. She marked the days not by calendar events, but by the ache of mornings without Kayla's voice, the stillness of an empty house where laughter used to live. She rarely answered the phone anymore. Friends stopped calling after enough unanswered messages piled up. Neighbors dropped off meals less and less often, their lives slowly reclaiming their normal rhythms while Janet remained frozen. She sat often at the small desk in Kayla's room, reading through journals her daughter had kept. Some entries were ordinary, class schedules, grocery lists. Others were glimpses of the future Kayla had been planning. Starting her own business, saving for a first house, traveling to places she had circled on a tattered map. Each goal, each scribbled dream, was a cut Janet couldn't protect herself from. Meanwhile, Detective Bishop observed the town change in subtle ways. Walmart installed new security measures, metal detectors, plainclothes security guards, mandatory employee counseling sessions. The measures came too late to save Kayla, but were framed as a commitment to moving forward. At the town council meetings, frustration simmered just beneath the surface. Residents argued about safety, about mental health funding, about whether it could happen again. Nobody mentioned Kayla's name directly anymore. It was as if saying it made the wound real again. For the surviving employees of Walmart, silence became survival. Heather Lowry, the coworker who had tried to perform CPR on Kayla, transferred to another Walmart 20 miles away. Others left retail entirely. Few talked openly about that day, but their avoidance spoke volumes. Trauma had spread like a quiet infection through Harrison. Kids walked a little faster through parking lots. Parents hovered closer to their children at public events. People glanced twice at strangers they would have once ignored. Janet found herself trapped between wanting to scream Kayla's name into the world, to force people to remember, and a bone-deep exhaustion that made even speaking feel impossible. One afternoon, she drove aimlessly for hours, finally stopping outside the cemetery where Kayla was buried. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at the small stone marker, unable to bring herself to cross the short distance to it. Inside her pocket was a letter, one she had written to Kayla but could never quite bring herself to leave behind. It simply said, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I miss you every minute. I don't know how to live in a world that let this happen." Janet folded the letter back into her jacket. Some pain was too private even for graves to hold. In her own way, she understood something the town was still grappling with. Moving on was a myth. Some things weren't meant to be healed. Some losses demanded to be carried. Winter arrived early that year, frosting the edges of Harrison with a chill that seemed to seep into its very bones. Christmas lights went up along Main Street, half-hearted and dim compared to past years. The town's spirit, once bright and noisy, had dulled into something quieter, almost apologetic. Janet Monroe avoided the holiday displays entirely. The thought of tinsel and carols, of smiling families wrapped in scarves, was unbearable. Kayla had loved Christmas. She had always insisted on putting up the tree too early, on baking cookies Janet pretended to dislike but secretly loved. Now, the idea of celebrating anything felt obscene. At one town council meeting in early December, a proposal was quietly introduced. A small memorial plaque for Kayla, to be installed on a bench outside the Walmart entrance. Simple, respectful, official. It was meant as a gesture, a way to show the town had not forgotten. But the discussion turned uncomfortable almost immediately. Some council members worried it would reopen wounds. Others argued it might scare customers away or keep the incident fresh in people's minds. A few said nothing at all, their silence louder than any objection. Janet wasn't at the meeting. She found out about the proposal secondhand, from a neighbor who awkwardly mentioned it while handing her a holiday card she didn't want. At first, Janet wanted to ignore it, to let the town wrestle with its own discomfort, but something inside her shifted. A small ember of anger that hadn't entirely gone out. A week later, she stood at the next council meeting, facing the same group of pale, fidgeting faces. She wore no makeup, no carefully curated expression, only grief laid bare. "You're worried about upsetting people," she said, voice low but steady. "Good. They should be upset. Kayla's gone. She's not coming back. The least you can do is let her name be seen." The room fell silent. No arguments, no defenses, just the heavy, guilty weight of truth. The plaque was approved, but quietly, almost shamefully. Minimal fanfare, no speeches, no ceremony. Janet designed it herself. In loving memory of Kayla Monroe, a light lost too soon, but never forgotten. When it was finally installed, just before the first snow of January, Janet visited it alone. She brushed a gloved hand across the metal, feeling the cold bite through her skin. For a long time, she sat there on the bench, watching shoppers drift past. Most didn't notice the plaque. Some glanced at it, then quickly looked away. But it was there. Kayla's name was carved into the town now, even if the town didn't know how to carry it. And for Janet, it was a small, fragile victory, not over grief, but against forgetting. The winter dragged on, heavy and gray. The kind of season where the sky pressed low against the earth, making everything, streets, houses, people, feel smaller, heavier. For Janet Monroe, it was a time of uneasy truce with grief. The memorial plaque gave her somewhere to go, something to anchor herself to when the loneliness became unbearable. Some mornings, she sat there for hours, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, just watching the world move around her. No one bothered her. Some people nodded awkwardly as they passed. Others kept their eyes firmly on their phones. Janet didn't mind. She wasn't there for them. At home, she began small acts of living again. Not healing, she hated that word, but existing. She planted a row of winter pansies along the front porch, even though they struggled in the cold. She rearranged the photos on the mantle, adding one of Kayla laughing at a college barbecue, head thrown back in pure, unguarded joy. And one afternoon, after months of ignoring the mail piling up, she filled out an application to volunteer at a local literacy center, the kind of quiet background work Kayla would have loved. It wasn't about distraction. It was about creating small spaces where love could survive alongside loss. Meanwhile, Detective Laura Bishop closed more cases, attended more crime scenes. Harrison returned to the slow, grinding rhythm of small-town life. But Bishop found herself driving past Walmart sometimes without meaning to, her eyes flickering to the bench and the plaque before she continued down Main Street. Some memories don't demand your attention. They simply wait for you at the edges, patient, certain. The town of Harrison tried its best to patch itself together. There were new community initiatives, talks on mental health awareness, neighborhood watch groups, even a scholarship fund in Kayla's name, quietly set up by a few of her former coworkers. None of it erased what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, it acknowledged it. One cold evening, Janet returned from the literacy center, exhausted but lighter in a way she hadn't felt in months. She parked outside the Walmart lot and, almost without thinking, walked to the bench. The plaque caught the glow of the parking lot lights, the metal warming under her fingertips despite the chill. A small bouquet of fresh flowers lay at the base of the bench. No note, no name. Janet sat down, holding the edge of the bench like a lifeline, and let herself remember not just the horror of the end, but the brightness of the years before it. Kayla's stubbornness, her endless laughter, her belief that kindness mattered even when it wasn't noticed. The tears came silently, but they didn't crush her this time. Grief wasn't smaller. It was simply woven into everything now, stitched invisibly into every breath, every step forward. And for the first time since that terrible day, Janet realized she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Somewhere, even quietly, even imperfectly, the town was carrying it with her. Detective Laura Bishop sat alone in her office one evening, long after most of the department had gone home. A stack of active case files sat on her desk, waiting for attention. Burglaries, domestic disputes, the small, ugly churn of everyday life. But her eyes kept drifting to a worn manila folder tucked neatly on a side shelf, its edges softened by handling. Monroe, Kayla, homicide. It was officially closed, open and shut. Suspect deceased, no trial, no appeals. Still, Bishop couldn't bring herself to archive it permanently. She knew the numbers. How many violent crimes she had investigated, how many arrests made, how many cases solved. But the numbers never captured the residue left behind. The way certain names, certain faces stayed lodged under the skin. Kayla's was one of them. It wasn't the violence itself that haunted Bishop. It was everything that came after. The quiet vacuum left behind when a life was stolen. The invisible wreckage that no report could quantify. Outside her window, the town of Harrison moved through another evening. Porch lights flickering on, muffled sounds of televisions through thin walls, life asserting itself stubbornly as it always did. She wondered how many people remembered. How many thought about Kayla when they passed Walmart's parking lot? How many crossed themselves without realizing it when they glanced at the small bench and plaque near the entrance? Bishop understood something that the public rarely did. Real aftermaths aren't dramatic. They're slow. They rot into the cracks of ordinary days. The things you almost forget until a birthday comes and there's no one to celebrate, or a chair sits empty at Christmas dinner. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 100 silent, unfinished stories pressing down on her. In another life, maybe Marcus Dillon would have gotten help. Maybe Kayla would still be alive. Maybe none of this would have happened. But there were no neat endings here. Only the brutal mathematics of reality. Actions taken, actions not taken, and the terrible gravity of their consequences. Before she left for the night, Bishop opened Kayla's file one more time. She didn't read it. She just looked at Kayla's employee photo clipped to the front. A candid smile, young and full of a life she hadn't yet lived enough. Bishop whispered under her breath, a ritual she had never shared with anyone. "You mattered." Then she placed the file back in its drawer, locked it, and turned off the lights. Outside, the wind carried the first hints of spring. Too early, too fragile. But enough to suggest that even after the longest winters, something like life tried to return. Not fixed, not whole, but still, somehow, moving forward. Spring crept into Harrison cautiously, as if testing whether the town was ready for it. The first crocuses pushed through the thawing ground near sidewalks, still stained with last season's salt. Life, stubborn and indifferent, went on. At the literacy center where Janet Monroe volunteered, a child asked her one afternoon why she wore a little silver necklace shaped like a star. Janet paused for a long moment before answering. "My daughter used to say that even when you can't see them, the stars are still there," she said quietly. The child didn't say anything, just nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to tracing letters on the worksheet. Janet smiled, a small, private thing, and felt the familiar ache pull through her chest. Grief didn't diminish. It simply folded itself into new spaces. At Walmart, the bench with Kayla's plaque remained. People still hurried past it, absorbed in their errands, but every once in a while, someone stopped, to read, to sit, to remember. The scholarship fund grew slowly, gathering donations from people who didn't always leave their names. At the first award ceremony that spring, Janet sat in the back of the small community hall, watching a young woman accept a modest check toward her college tuition. The recipient's essay had been about perseverance, about standing back up even when the world knocked you down. Janet wept quietly, not from sadness exactly, but from the terrible beauty of what remained possible, even after everything. Detective Bishop attended the ceremony too, lingering in the back, unnoticed. She left before the speeches ended, but not before reading the program, where Kayla's name was printed carefully at the top of the page. In memory of a life lived with kindness and courage. The town didn't heal, not really. No town does after something like that. It simply learned to carry the weight more quietly, to let grief and memory coexist in the spaces between its streets and homes. Marcus Dillon's name faded from conversation, a shadow that receded but never fully disappeared. Kayla's name remained, stitched into the fabric of a town that had failed her in so many ways, but now, in small and halting steps, tried to do better. In her kitchen one night, Janet framed a new photo, a picture of the scholarship winner standing proudly with her certificate, smiling shyly at the camera. She placed it beside Kayla's graduation photo side by side. Not a replacement. Never that. Just another reminder that even when the worst had happened, even when the story had cracked and broken apart, something lasting, something stubbornly good, could still grow in the hollow places. The loss would never leave her, but neither would Kayla. And that, Janet realized, was its own kind of survival,